I'm an English teacher at Poudre High School. I'm also a product of our system here at PSD, so I'm very excited to be a part of this great group. All right. Historically, the United States excelled at educating the masses and preparing them for the world they lived in. Our education system mimicked our production system. Happy little children sitting in happy little rows, memorizing multiplication tables and spelling lists. We would all read the same thing and write the same paper and do the same tasks. Our goal was to excel at standardization. Those who didn't fit into the system were ignored, ostracized, labeled, and forgotten. So think back to your own schooling experience. And I want you to picture that one kid. We all know that kid. The one kid who was the troublemaker. So for me, it was this boy who sat in front of me in earth science in 8th grade. And rather than take notes on the science lecture, he was actively looking for ways to distract those around him. On one particular day, the only day I really remember now, he was rifling through a box of crayons and pulling out all the crayons that had crayons that were tasted like, that were named after flavors. So he wanted to know if the crayons tasted like the flavors they were named after. Colors like orange, lemon, lime, blue, raspberry. We all know, him included, that they wouldn't, but that didn't mean it wouldn't be an entertaining experiment. He proceeded to test his hypothesis and ate crayon after crayon. At first, it was just a few of us who were distracted by his behavior, but his audience quickly grew as he plowed through the entire box. Meanwhile, my teacher just kept lecturing and writing on the chalkboard. I still wonder what that boy learned about his digestive tract as a result of his experiment. The troublemakers of our past were ahead of their time. They saw something in our system that was broken and found ways to disrupt and manipulate it. Students still do this in many classrooms today. There are all sorts of reasons for this, but ultimately some aspect of our education system just doesn't work for that particular student. At some point, classes start reaching TCM, troublemaker critical mass. No matter how you build your seating chart, you just can't separate students enough to prevent conflict, quiet the chatter, and end the showboating. This happened to me several years ago in my 30-student 9th grade English class, of course right after lunch, housed in the tiniest classroom at Poudre High School, which used to be the department's book storage room. I had 24 boys, 6 girls, and about a third of the class had some kind of support plan. But I didn't have any support staff with me. So my students were also mostly visible and kinesthetic learners and very talkative. I could either adapt my students or be eaten alive, pull out my hair, or cry myself to sleep in a corner by myself. The only real choice for me was to embrace my troublemakers and figure out how to make my class work for them. Rather than avoiding the dreaded question, why are we doing this? I worked through the answer with them. Was I teaching them something because of my own nostalgia or because I thought it would prepare them for their futures? Through exploring the underlying rationale and communicating this to my students, I created a clear vision for us all that was focused on enhancing the student experience in tangible ways for them. I got rid of my desks and gave students chairs and clipboards so that we could move around freely. We started meditating daily. We embraced a project-based learning curriculum that offered choice, and we talked a lot. Every day was an example of somewhat organized chaos, and there were still many days that I wanted to cry or scream or run away, but we made it. By the end of my year, my troublemakers had started to blossom. They became masters of Socratic seminars. They were respectfully and empathetically debating what it means to be human. They created interactive museum exhibits that they shared with hundreds of their peers, and they learned to throw Shakespearean insults in choreographed sword fights. I still have some of these students today for the 3rd year in a row, and while they still act like troublemakers sometimes, they largely harness their disruptive powers for good and rise to the challenges that I give them. Now, the question is, was it right for me to adapt to my students versus forcing my students to adapt and understand the system? Typically, people argue that students need to learn to follow the rules so they can be productive members of society. But every year, more and more of those societal rules are being broken and redefined. So I want you to think about standing in line for a minute. When is the last time you stood in line to buy a ticket at a movie theater? Even this fundamental idea that you have to wait your turn is quickly falling by the wayside. The jobs that existed where people needed to learn the tasks that they repeated over and over again in a factory in a factory line have almost vanished. So jobs that don't require critical thinking, problem solving, collaboration, innovation are quickly being replaced by robots and artificial intelligence who can do it more efficiently and cheaply. This is why there's a disconnect between what the US education system produces, students, and what businesses need, employees. So continuing to force students to learn arbitrary rules for the sake of learning how to be compliant will not prepare them for their futures. We need to embrace our troublemakers in our classroom because from them, we can learn how best to disrupt our practices and pedagogies in order to create an environment that will enable students to be ready for the future. As an institution, we don't need to be the givers of knowledge. They can just Google it. As an institution, we need to teach them how to think, how to debate, how to solve wicked problems, and how to adapt. Because frankly, the world we are living in is one that is full of chock full of wicked problems. And most of us in this room aren't going to be around or in a position to help them solve them. So rather than rely on the phrase, "because I said so," when a student asks why, we have to embrace the questioning of our authority and ideas and explore the answer with students so that they then ask, what's next?